You're tuned in to Getting to the Root of It, focusing on healing and letting go of the wounds of addiction and other unresolved traumas of the past. Your breakthrough begins with you. Are you ready to change your life? Stay tuned as your host, expert therapist, personal development coach, and spiritual cheerleader, Natashah Khan, inspires you to live the life you were destined to live.
Hi everyone. Good morning, good day, or good evening, depending upon the time you may be tuning in. This is your host, Natashah Khan. Thank you for joining me on my latest podcast, Getting to the Root of It. In this first episode, I wanted to take an opportunity to formally introduce myself and for my listeners to get to know me just a little bit better. I wanted to spend some time in just sharing with you a little bit about my journey and how I came to be the strong and courageous woman that I am today, that's free from bondage, free from addiction, free from the hurts and hang-ups that I've experienced in my life. It was not an easy journey, and it all started back when I was a little girl, born in a different country, raised in a different culture. I'm originally from Trinidad and Tobago. I'm of West Indian descent, raised by my parents who are now married 50 years, and I have an older sister. My life got turned upside down without even realizing it until later in life. But it started at a young age and never really understanding or realizing that everyone and everything around me had an influence on me. It influenced my mind. It influenced my thought process. It shaped attitudes, patterns of thinking, patterns of behavior that carried with me throughout my life. Now, before I move any further, it's important for us to understand that there's no blame here. There is no passing judgment. There is no one particular person's fault. It's a series of events that has occurred that impacted the progression of my illness of addiction. I am in recovery today, but it took a while to get here, and there were a lot of lessons I had to learn along the way. I am a therapist by trade, and I've been in the field of addiction and mental health for the last 25 years. So I've not just learned a lot academically, but I've learned a lot personally. And I wanted this episode to be an opportunity to share my experience and provide some strength and provide some hope for anyone that's out there listening that may be struggling with mental health issues or struggling with substance abuse issues, or may have been raised in a dysfunctional environment, that may have struggled with trauma or struggled with anxiety, struggled with depression. I've experienced it all. And I used to think that what I endured, I would never overcome. I thought that that was going to be my life. I thought that I would never truly find peace and freedom and joy and happiness, that I was a product of my environment and I was going to be what everybody said that I was going to be, which was, you're a failure, you're not good enough, you're not important enough. And while growing up, a lot of that may not have been said directly to me. Things were said that led me to believe that I wasn't good enough, or that I wasn't trying hard enough, or that I could always be better. Growing up as a kid, I heard a lot about that I talked too much, that I wasn't trying hard enough, or if I did something, it wasn't good enough. And it had such a hold on me, but never realized it growing up. As a child, I spent my time people-pleasing. I strived for perfection. I developed this attitude that I was either going to do it right or I wasn't going to do it at all. I was either going to be perfect at it, or if I wasn't perfect, then I have failed at it. I had a lot of black and white thinking. I made a lot of decisions in life with that concrete way of thinking that led to a lot of problems in my life, a lot of conflict in relationships as a result. It led to me being codependent because I was more focused on what I needed to do for others to like me, what I needed to do for others to be happy with me, and I wanted to feel like I was a part of something. I wanted to feel like I belong. I don't know if anyone out there listening today can relate to this, but this is my experience and truly my perspective. I'm sure many of the people that were around me growing up may not see it the same way. But there's power in our words, and what we say and how we say it does truly have an influence and an impact on our lives. And when we are children, we are like sponges, and everything that is said and done, we absorb, and we can't help but internalize what's being said to us or what's being done to us. And for many of us who have suffered trauma at a very tender age, that trauma also impacts the development of our brain. It impacts what happens with our emotions and what we do with our emotions. And I think we live in a world sometimes that gets so hyper-focused on how to mask how we truly feel, or how to look a certain way, or to pretend that everything is okay. But in reality, we're not. We're not okay. Many of us are suffering in silence. Many of us are battling emotional issues. Many of us are holding on to negative beliefs, such as I'm not good enough, I'm not capable, I'm not worthy, I'm not lovable. The list goes on. And many of us don't know what to do with that. Many of us don't know that we can speak up about it. Many of us believe that what we have to say isn't important enough, or it doesn't matter, or no one's going to listen. And in reality, there's a part of me that felt that way about starting a podcast. I wasn't sure that what I had to say and the message that I had would be beneficial to anyone, that anyone would want to listen, that anyone would be able to relate and or identify. You know, we all struggle with insecurities. There's some aspect of ourselves that we may not like or we may be ashamed of. And rather than speak about it and allow ourselves to be vulnerable and speak our truth, many of us find ourselves hiding, masking, and then most oftentimes using food and sex and money and drugs and alcohol and work and relationships as a way to cope. A lot of what I'm sharing today, I did not know. I did not know in early childhood. I didn't even know in young adulthood. I was married at the age of 19. I started using and experimenting with drugs and alcohol around the age of 18. And I experimented with it. It didn't cause any harm to me or to my husband or to anyone around us. I had never or had not at the time suffered any consequences. And then years later, as I cultivated my own family, I had 2 daughters. I had my second child by the time I was 24. I had my first when I was 21. My husband and I started using socially. And again, no consequences. There was no harm to myself or to anyone else. And it was also socially acceptable to go to a party and have a few drinks, or to smoke some marijuana. Or I went to the club and, someone offered me a Xanax. Or I was prescribed Xanax for anxiety. And then there were days when I wasn't necessarily feeling anxious, but I would take a Xanax and I would have a drink. Many people that are listening may say, well, you should have known better. You're an adult. How can you do that? Well, a lot of times when we're not fully educated, we lack knowledge and understanding of things, when we lack healthy coping skills, when we don't have consequences, when we are not held accountable and we're sort of running our own show and we're responsible for ourselves, we most oftentimes find ourselves doing what we want, when we want, where we want, and how we want. And I guess after leaving home, when I got married and living on my own, having my own kids, I had my own house, I had my own life, I was no longer controlled or ruled by anyone. I grew up in a very strict household, and while I value discipline And while I value obedience and being respectful to elders, there were some things that were taught in my home that from my perspective were somewhat excessive and or extreme. So when I moved out on my own, it was a time for me to be free. It was a time for me to let go and to try to find me. And in my search for finding me, I went to the extreme where there was no accountability. There was no more being obedient. There was no more being respectful to others and to myself, which led me to live a very carefree and careless lifestyle. Again, I'm in my 20s and I'm young and I'm having fun and no one's getting hurt. So now my social using of mind and mood altering substances now progresses to me being a high functioning user. I worked all day. My kids were in school. They came home. I made dinner. They did homework. Their father and I were responsible for the bills. We were being responsible adults. We were being providers to our children and to our family unit. Again, we were not enduring any consequences. No one was being harmed. Most oftentimes I would drink and use when my kids went to bed, and no one knew. My husband and I used together, and it was just something we did every night. We used the excuse it was a way to unwind. It was a way to relax. It was a way to take the edge off of the day. Sometimes we justified by saying that we deserved a reward. We deserved to just have a little fun because we worked hard all week long. So there were a lot of excuse making, rationalizing, and justifying through the years of using. And then after 13 years of marriage, and now we're talking about my late 20s, rolling into my 30s, I learned that my husband had found interest in another. And this was devastating, not just to me, but to our entire family unit. And it was difficult, to say the least. I was devastated because I had built my life around my husband, my children, our house, my identity, and who I was, or who I thought I was tied into the role of being a mother and being a wife and being a daughter, a sister, and a friend. Once I had learned about my husband's interest in another, he had made a decision after 13 years of marriage that he did not want to be in our marriage any longer. He wanted a divorce, and I didn't know what to do. I remembered, and this is how toxic I was in my mind and in my decision making, I remembered pleading with him to date us both, to not give up on us. I was willing to do whatever it would take to save our marriage. Because without my marriage, who am I? But of course, he didn't agree to that and went ahead with the divorce anyway. And in the process of getting the divorce, I had decided that I was going to move back home to Florida with my girls, which is part of another story for another day. My marriage was hitting a rough patch prior to, a few years before. My husband was depressed, he was struggling, and I had given him the ultimatum of a divorce if he wasn't willing to do what needed to be done to get better and to refocus on building a life together. So at the time, my ultimatum seemed like the right thing to do. It was either we get divorced or we moved out to Texas to where we can be closer to his family, to his brother and cousins, and the kids had their cousins out there as well around the same age. Seemed like the most practical thing to do, not realizing then that I was being codependent and trying to be the problem solver and trying to fix him. Meanwhile, taking all the focus off of myself and focusing more on what he needed and how he needed it and what we needed to do to help him not be depressed anymore. Keep in mind that I am young and I don't have the knowledge nor the experience I have today to have a better understanding that that's not how you solve depression, and you don't solve mental health issues by geographically picking yourself up and moving to another state. Because I've learned in Alcoholics Anonymous, wherever you go, there you are. You can't run from yourself. So no matter where you move to, what kind of clothes you wear, what kind of shoes you wear, what kind of car you drive, it doesn't matter. You are who you are underneath all of that. but I never really took the time to really pay attention to who I really was, because I thought I was a mother, I was a daughter, I was a wife, I was a good friend, a good colleague. I worked hard, but I also played hard. After moving the kids to Florida and coming back with the plan to be a single mother and raise my children, I moved back home to be closer to family and friends. Within 3 days of my arrival, I had a sheriff officer at my door providing me with a subpoena to have to appear in court because my husband wanted to file for divorce officially. In addition, I was being charged with kidnapping because I had moved my children across state lines. And so now I was facing a felony charge and needed to return to the state of Texas in order to return my kids to their dad. Needless to say, during this time, I was feeling powerless. Here, my 13-year marriage is coming to an end. Now I have to drag my children through court, and there's a high risk that I could lose my kids. While my biggest fears came true, I hired a pro bono attorney because at the time, financially, I didn't have the means to get an attorney to help me fight the case. I was told by the pro bono attorney that when I returned to the state, that the court just needed to hear both sides of the case and that the children would finish out the school year, and then more than likely the children can return home with me so that they can continue with school and they would be around friends and family. Well, to my surprise, I go into court, and that was a day that the rug was pulled from under me. And I remember it like it was yesterday. I discovered that because I was a single parent and my husband at the time had moved in with this person of interest, he was deemed to be the most fit parent based on stability because it was a 2-person household versus me being a single mother and working. The judge believed that I would not be able to provide my children with the stability that they needed. And on those grounds alone, my ex-husband was then granted primary custody of our girls. I walked out of that courtroom that day just not only shocked and in despair, but totally lost, because the one thing that I had left in my life, I believe, was taken from me. So not only did I lose my 13-year marriage, I lost the relationship, the love of my life. I've now lost my children. This took my depression to a level deeper than I ever thought imaginable. I became so depressed, I didn't want to get out of bed. And what I found myself doing was drinking more and more every day. From the moment I woke up till I went to bed, every chance that I got, I was drinking. And in between that, I would smoke marijuana or I would take some prescription pill that I would have had in my medicine cabinet. Within 6 months, my use of mind and mood-altering substances progressed significantly. And still, no consequences, no significant losses. I mean, really, at this point, there was nothing else to lose. I didn't have my home, I didn't have my marriage, I didn't have my girls. There really wasn't anything else to lose. And from my perspective back then, there really wasn't anything else left to live for. So as a result of that, the depression, coupled with my using mind and mood-altering substances, led to an attempt of suicide. Never in a million years did I think that I would have ever found myself in that place, so alone, so empty, so lost, and couldn't even begin to imagine how to find my way back. But this is where the story gets good. And this is where the story gets better. Because up until that defining moment in my life, while I knew of God, I was raised in a Muslim home and I learned about God in school. I knew of him, but I didn't have an intimate relationship with him. And as God would have it, and I'm always remembered and reminded by scripture, Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the plans I have for you, to give you hope in the future. And that is so true, because after overcoming the attempted suicide, I began to have experiences in my life where God had placed very important people in my life, in my path, that helped bring me in closer relationship with him. My eyes began to open. I began to see and hear, and grew to have a desire to learn more about him. Following the attempt of suicide, I, still feeling very alone and lost, I came to a place of surrender. I remembered sitting on my bed and crying and just sort of throwing my hands in the air and saying, okay, what do you want from me? What do you need from me? And what is it that I need to do? Because everything that I had lived for and everything that I had built my life around is now gone. I don't know who I am. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And I don't know where I'm supposed to be going. And I truly believe in my heart and in my spirit that moment of surrender, being mentally, physically, and emotionally exhausted, was the day that God took over my life. Like the Carrie Underwood song, Jesus Take the Wheel. That was the day that he took the wheel of my life and began to lead me. And every day and every week to follow, I began to have experiences and or interactions with individuals that were willing to either share the word of God or they would just pray for me. And several months later following that, I made a decision to return back to Florida without my girls. Clearly, I didn't have primary custody of them, and their father was not going to allow them to move back to Florida with me. But I needed to start over. I needed to be around some form of a support system. And although my childhood family may have had its problems and I may have grown up in dysfunction, it was the only support system I had. And I was willing to at least grab hold of that support, because some support is better than no support at all. And in 2009, I made a decision to return to Florida and start a new life. I believe that God gave me a canvas, a blank canvas, to start new. See, the canvas before was filled with my upbringing, my abuse, my trauma, what other people told me I needed to believe, the influences of others, my people pleasing, my being a perfectionist, and my striving to be something that others wanted me to be. Right? That canvas was about building a life and having a family, having a husband and having kids and having the house and having the car and having the American dream. That canvas was built for everyone else, or with everyone else in mind. God wasn't at the center of that first canvas. He needed to be, and he should have been, but he wasn't. So this new canvas that he gave me and this opportunity to begin a new life, there was no doubt in my mind that he needed to be the center of my canvas. And just around the center of God, I've learned that I am next in line, that I matter, that I am worth it, that I am somebody, that I am a child of God, that I deserve good things and I deserve what God has promised. I deserve a life worth living if I'm willing to follow his lead, if I'm willing to surrender my will, my need to control. I deserve everything. Let me correct that. I don't deserve anything, but I would be blessed and I would be honored to live the life that he's called me to live. And I have been very blessed in the last 12 or 13 years to live a life that is full of joy, happiness, peace, and freedom from bondage. I am free today, and I get to be me. I've learned in this journey who I am. I am beautiful. I am strong. I am confident. I am courageous. I'm a child of God. And I have a power and a strength within me that cannot be taken away unless I choose to give it away. There are times in my life where I may feel like I'm powerless, but my strength and my comfort and that regained power comes from God. Knowing him, understanding his word, knowing his truth, allows me to speak my truth. It allows me the opportunity today to be able to launch this podcast and future episodes where I get to be me. I get to be vulnerable. I get to share my life experiences. I get to share what I've learned in school and what I've learned in my profession about how we are to treat mental health and substance abuse issues. How do we treat codependent and toxic relationships? How do we learn to set healthy boundaries? But more importantly, how do we learn to love ourselves unconditionally? The value in, exercising self-care. Those are the things that I plan to bring to you in our future episodes of Getting to the Root of It. There's so much more to this story, and there's so much more that I want to share with all of you that are listening today. I thank you for tuning in. I thank you for listening to me share my experience, strength, and hope. I pray more than anything that what you've learned today will inspire you just enough, motivate you just enough to want to come back and listen to the next episode and the next episode after that, so that you can continue to be encouraged and you can continue to be empowered to step out and finally speak your truth. Own your truth, good, bad, or indifferent. Life is about our progress, not perfection. This is a journey that we're taking. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to not be perfect, because we are perfectly imperfect. And when we start to embrace ourselves, flaws and all, the sky's the limit. I'm no longer worried about what other people may think of me. I'm no longer concerned of whether someone likes me or not, or if they want to be my friend, or if I have to behave a certain way for someone to like me. I like me. I love me. I know that God likes me, and I know that God loves me. And the unconditional love, grace, and mercy and forgiveness that God bestows upon me, I learn to embrace it so that I can bestow that upon another human being. I thank you so much for listening today, and I look forward to sharing with you so much more of me and all that I've learned in my journey and how I can continue to help you in your journey. If you are interested in wanting to talk to me more one-on-one and want to continue this conversation, you can reach me via email at empoweredvoices45@gmail.com, or you can check me out on my newest website, collaborativehealingpartners.com. That's www.collaborativehealingpartners.com. Feel free to reach out and or tune in next time on Getting to the Root of It. This is your host, Natashah Khan. Have a blessed day.